Hey everyone, I just wanted to make you this video to go over your expectations for this week, and then to also kind of go over our topics a little bit more in detail for you to hopefully give you a better understanding of what we're going through. So hopefully you guys are watching this because this is what's going to help you get through your stuff. Um, we are going to be talking about cellular transport, photosynthesis, and cellular respiration. Obviously, as your assignments last week told you, that's what this week's assignments are about as well. So first, let's talk about the week. There's no formal Zoom meeting this week. Make sure you go to the Google form on Classroom and fill it out. Let me know whatever help you might need, whatever questions you might have. That'll be your check-in for your time this week. Also, let me know if you need me. If you need a Zoom, let me know and we will make a Zoom happen. But there's no formal Zoom. Monday, there's no school. Tuesday, I'm going to have you play through a photosynthesis interactive game. You basically click through, information pops up, you do what the information says, it gives you facts about photosynthesis. So just play till you get to the end, and the instructions literally pop up as you go. And when you're done with it, you're going to screenshot the final screen and paste it in the Google Doc and submit it, and that's how you're going to get points for doing that assignment. Wednesday, there's an ed puzzle about cellular respiration. You guys know what to do with ed puzzles. Go through that, complete it, submit it. And then at the end of the week for Thursday and Friday, there's a photosynthesis and respiration game that you're going to play through. This game, it's kind of like Mario Brothers or something. You have a little guy you're going to walk through. You're either going to capture items you need or drag them places. The instructions literally tell you, it pops up and tells you as you play. And it asks you questions about respiration and photosynthesis along the way. Just like the Tuesday assignment, once you get to the end of it, it gives you like a score page, and I want you to screenshot that, paste it in the Google Doc, and submit the Google Doc, and that's how you will get points for doing that. That one's due Friday night. Both of those, I want you to get a decent score, so make sure you get at least a 75 or higher and paste it in. If you need to redo it to get those points, that's fine. It does not take long to play. But get a 75 or higher, screenshot it, paste it in the Google Doc, turn it in for Tuesday and Thursday's assignments. And again, if you guys need me, let me know and I'll help you out. Email me questions, Google Hangouts me a question, or we'll set up a Zoom if you need that. Also, I want to go through some facts about cellular transport, photosynthesis, and cellular respiration. So the rest of this video is me going through those topics for you, hopefully making it make a little bit more sense. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to start with cellular transport and then move into photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Hopefully, after last week's assignments and getting into this week's assignments, you already know a little bit about this stuff, but I'm going to go through it and break it down for you and hopefully make a little bit more sense if you need it. So between the resources I've provided and this video, you should have a pretty good idea about these topics. First, let's talk about cellular transport, starting with diffusion. When you see the word diffusion, we're talking about particles moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. If you look at these pictures, it's easy to see that the red particles and the blue particles are separated. Like there's a high concentration of red on the left, high concentration of blue on the right. Now, all the particles of everything, solids, liquid, gases, doesn't matter. Particles are constantly moving. You might not be able to see it, but they are. And as they move from a high concentration to a low concentration, you can see the red and blue begin to blend, and suddenly they're distributed equally throughout. And you can tell the particles moved because the color appears purple now instead of a lot of red and a lot of blue. Like now it's mixed. There's no energy required for diffusion. The particles are already moving. So they just move from that high concentration to that low concentration. Makes it a whole lot easier for them to move because they're already moving. Like this is just gonna happen. We call this passive transport when it doesn't really require additional energy. That's called passive transport. Now, osmosis, it's kind of the same thing. It's the diffusion of water. So if you know what diffusion is, you already know what osmosis is. But osmosis is only talking about water. So when you have a membrane that's permeable, meaning things can go through it, and water goes through it, that is osmosis. We would call water the solvent, and it moves across the membrane until the concentration of the solute is the same on both sides. You can see these particles over here. The water just keeps moving until the particles make sense, like they're evenly distributed in a way that makes sense. So diffusion of water, that's what osmosis is. Okay. Now, active transport, those things were passive transport. They did not require energy additional to the energy they already had. Active transport, sometimes it requires energy. It's when things move from a lower concentration to an area with higher concentration. And these particles move across the cell membrane against the gradient, against the concentration gradient. So they require energy. Again, that's active transport. Usually there's going to be some kind of a carrier protein that we call a pump. You can see the particle moving. It goes through the carrier protein and it pumps it out the other side. Like that required energy. That's not just a typical movement. Anytime it requires energy and requires some help along the way, that's active transport, okay? And then sometimes we're trying to move really large particles. That takes a lot more energy. We have these two processes called endocytosis and exocytosis. Endocytosis is when the cell surrounds an object from the outside environment and pulls it inside. So endocytosis pulls it in. Exocytosis is when things are excreted out of the membrane. So they're surrounded and pushed out, or they exit. Exocytosis is when they exit. That's how I remember. Endocytosis, things go in the cell. Exocytosis, things exit the cell. So keep those two separated in your mind. Okay? Now, when we talk about all this stuff that requires movement and motion and things coming in, things going out, cells require energy. And we define energy as the ability to do work. And then we take the word thermodynamics, and we know that that means the study of how energy flows and is transformed throughout the universe. But all these processes that our bodies undergo, that our cells undergo, require energy. So now we're going to talk about how that energy is obtained and how it's used. Now, in thermodynamics, we have the first law of thermodynamics. It tells us the law of conservation of energy. Energy cannot be converted from one form or another. It cannot be created or destroyed. It can change form, but it doesn't just come out of nowhere and it doesn't get destroyed. That's the first law. The second law, energy cannot be converted without the loss of some energy. So entropy or disorder of the usable energy is going to increase. So the first law, things cannot be created or destroyed, but they can change form. And the second law tells us when those conversions happen, we do lose a little bit of energy. Energy's used up. Okay. Now we have our autotrophs and heterotrophs. Hopefully you remember those words from a previous unit. Either directly or indirectly, all the energy for life comes from the sun. Now autotrophs, like a plant, it uses the sun to make their food. Heterotrophs eat other things to get energy. So we have this chain of events here, like autotrophs absorb the sun and make energy. This little insect is going to eat the plant that absorbed the energy from the sun. This insect's going to eat the little insect that ate the plant that absorbed the energy from the sun. So as you can see, whether you're making it from the sun directly or eating something that ate the thing that made energy from the sun, or you're eating something that ate something that absorbed the energy from the sun, that's, no matter how you look at it, that energy began from the sun. So whether you're a heterotroph or autotroph, you get energy from the sun. And that's what this point is trying to be made here. Now we have metabolism. When you think of metabolism, we think of how energy is consumed or created. Photosynthesis is the pathway in which light from the sun, light energy from the sun is used and converted into chemical energy to be used by the cells. And cellular respiration is a catabolic pathway in which organic molecules are broken down to release energy used by the cells. So photosynthesis is used by plants. Cellular respiration is used by animals and humans. And then ATP, adenosine triphosphate, that's the unit of cellular energy. You're going to see that word a lot in biology class. ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That is a unit of energy in our cells. So in living things, chemical energy is stored in all those biological molecules that we briefly talked about recently. And ATP is the most important biological molecule that provides us energy. It's called adenosine triphosphate because it has adenine, some kind of a base, some kind of an adenine base. Then we have the ribose sugar. Here's a hint. Anytime something ends with OSE, that's a sugar. So adenine base, ribose sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. So adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine here, the adenine base, ribose sugar, triphosphate is the 3 phosphate groups. That's what ATP looks like. Now, what happens, what it does is it releases energy when the bond between the second and third phosphate groups are broken up, and it transforms into a molecule called adenosine diphosphate, ADP. So it has an adenine, ribose, and 2 phosphates. 1 phosphate's released, and when that's released, energy is created. So that's how our cells get energy. That phosphate group is knocked off, and it creates a spark of energy that is consumable by our cells. That's a very condensed version of what happens, but we'll break that down here soon. That's the energy in a nutshell, but here let's talk about specifically photosynthesis. So most autotrophs make organic compounds using photosynthesis, and photosynthesis is the process of converting light energy into chemical energy. So if you were to think of it chemically, here's a chemical formula. We have some units of carbon dioxide, some units of water, and some light, which is converted into sugar and oxygen. That's photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide plus water plus light gives us sugar and oxygen, okay? It occurs in 2 phases. We have the light-dependent phase and the light-independent phase. In the light-dependent phase, it needs light. Light-independent phase, it does not need light. In the light-dependent phase, light energy is converted into chemical energy, and the light-independent phase, chemical energy is used to make glucose, basically. So phase 1, during the light reactions, the absorption of light is the first step of photosynthesis. So the plant takes in the light from the sun. Once that light energy is captured, it's either stored as ATP, which we've talked about, or NADPH, which is another form of energy. Now, chloroplasts are the organelles in the cell that capture light energy. So this is only going to happen in plants because only plants have chloroplasts. They contain 2 main compartments. We have the thylakoids, which are these flattened little sacs with stacks of thylakoids are called grana. And the fluid-filled space outside the grana is called the stroma. But this right here is a chloroplast, and this is what is contained in a plant cell to capture that light energy. And then the pigments, light-absorbing molecules called pigments are found in the thylakoid membranes. Different pigments can absorb different wavelengths of light, and the most common pigment in a plant is chlorophyll. They also have accessory pigments, but chlorophyll is the important one that we're going to be needing to know about in a plant. And then we have the electron transport chain. So during this light reaction, electrons are transported. So the thylakoid membrane has a large surface area, like in terms of the size of a cell, it's pretty big. It provides space for a large number of electrons that transport molecules, and then 2 types of protein complexes that we call photosystems. And these little photosystems house the light capturing pigments. So basically, these are the areas that capture the light. A photosystem is where the light is captured during photosynthesis. Light energy excites the electrons in the photosystems, so the electrons get excited, start moving faster. This causes a water molecule to split, releasing an electron into the electron transport system, a hydrogen ion into the thylakoid space, and oxygen is released as a waste product. So when you think about it, we humans and other animals require oxygen to breathe. If plants didn't undergo this photosynthesis and give off a whole bunch of oxygen as waste, we wouldn't have an oxygen source. So that's really cool when you think about it. Their waste is something that we have to have, and that's pretty cool, at least to me. But moving on, the activated electrons move from photosystem 1 to photosystem 2 to an acceptor molecule in the thylakoid membrane. And then the electron acceptor molecule transfers the electrons along a series of electron carriers into photosystem 1. Now, in the presence of light, photosystem 1 transfers the electrons to a protein that we call ferredoxin. And then ferredoxin transfers the electrons to the carrier molecule NADP+, forming the energy storage molecule NADPH. Now, at this point, ATP is produced in conjunction with the electron transport system through chemiosmosis. ATP is produced through the flow of electrons down a concentration gradient, and the breakdown of water provides the necessary protons for ATP synthesis. In a nutshell, that's a lot of big fancy words and a lot to take in. What you need to know is that during the light reactions, energy is absorbed from the sun and chemically converted into ATP and also the NADPH. But most importantly, you just remember ATP, okay? Sunlight is absorbed, ATP is created. If you can remember that, you are great. Okay, phase 2, the Calvin cycle. You can see here, lots of ATP is created. This is the second phase of photosynthesis. Again, it's called the Calvin cycle. Energy is stored in organic molecules such as glucose. The first step of the Calvin cycle is called carbon fixation. Basically, carbon dioxide molecules combine with these 5 carbon molecules to form 3-phosphoglycerate or 3-PGA. Okay. In the second step, chemical energy is stored in ATP, and NADPH is transferred to the 3-PGA to form glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, or G3P. In the third step, some G3P molecules leave the cycle to be used for the production of glucose and other organic compounds. In the fourth and final step, an enzyme called Ribisco converts the remaining G3P molecules into 5 carbon molecules called ribulose 1,5-biphosphates, or RUBP. And these molecules combine with the new CO2 and continue the cycle. What's important here, and I'm going to go back, what's important here to know is during phase 2, the sun is not required. It's light independent at this point. And it makes a lot of ATP. Like, there's a lot of ATP being made right here in the Calvin cycle, okay? That's what you need to remember. I know I just said a lot of big fancy science words, but you need to remember that lots of ATP are made during the Calvin cycle. Now, sometimes some plants don't have a lot of access to the sun, like what if, or a lot of access to water. If they're in the desert, there's not a lot of water. If they're deep in underwater in the ocean or something, there's not a lot of sunlight. So sometimes plants need different ways to get their energy. There's the C4 pathway, which allows plants to maintain photosynthesis even if they don't have a lot of water. So things in the desert. Significant structural modification in the arrangement of cells within the leaves separate carbon dioxide uptake from the Calvin cycle. CAM plants, crassulacean acid metabolism, or just CAM, is found in desert plants. They collect carbon dioxide at night and store it in organic compounds. During the day, they release the carbon dioxide from the compounds for the light-dependent cycle. So they're able to do it anyway, even without a lot of other required things typically. And so that's photosynthesis. Sunlight is absorbed by plants and lots of ATP is made. Oxygen is given off as a byproduct. Now, next, we're going to look at cellular respiration, which is basically, if you look at the chemical formula, it's the exact opposite of photosynthesis. In this case, oxygen is absorbed and glucose is absorbed, or sugar, and carbon dioxide and water and energy is given off. So it is literally a flip-flop of photosynthesis and is used by animals instead of plants. So organisms obtain energy during cellular respiration, organisms that aren't plants. Respiration harvests electrons from the organic molecules and uses the energy to make ATP. The equation for cellular respiration is, again, the opposite of photosynthesis. Sugar plus oxygen gives us carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Okay, cellular respiration has two main parts. We have glycolysis and aerobic respiration. Glycolysis is an anaerobic process, meaning it does not require oxygen. So when you see that word anaerobic, oxygen is not required. And then when we have aerobic respiration, that does require oxygen. And there's a thing called the Krebs cycle and electron transport that does require oxygen. Okay, aerobic processes require oxygen. Glycolysis is when glucose is broken down into the cytoplasm through the process of, again, glycolysis. 2 molecules of ATP and 2 molecules of NADH are formed for each molecule of glucose broken down. So you get 2 of each of those every time you break down a glucose. Then the Krebs cycle, okay, glycolysis has a net result of 2 ATP and 2 pyruvate. That doesn't seem like a lot, right? Most of the energy from glucose is contained in the pyruvate. So in the presence of oxygen, pyruvate is transported into the mitochondrial matrix where it's converted into carbon dioxide. And this series of reaction where pyruvate is broken down into carbon dioxide, we call that the Krebs cycle or the tricarboxylic acid cycle or TCA cycle. I'm mostly going to call it the Krebs cycle, but those are other names for it. This part makes the most of the ATP that is used. So the steps of the Krebs cycle. Prior to the Krebs cycle, pyruvate reacts with coenzyme A or CoA to form acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA moves into the mitochondrial matrix. Acetyl-CoA combines with a 4-carbon compound to form citric acid. Citric acid is broken down, releasing 2 molecules of carbon dioxide and generating 1 ATP, 3 NADH, and 1 FADH2. And finally, acetyl-CoA and the citric acid are generated, and the cycle continues over and over. Again, that's a lot of fancy words here. I want you to know that the Krebs cycle makes ATP. It makes ATP. In aerobic respiration, the electron transport is the final step in the breakdown of glucose. NADH and FADH2 from the Krebs cycle are used to convert ADP to ATP. If you remember in photosynthesis, it went ATP to ADP. Well, in respiration, it's the opposite. It goes ADP to ATP. Electron transport and chemiosmosis in aerobic respiration are similar to the processes of photosynthesis. So it's going to look the same, just going in a different direction, basically. Prokaryotic cellular respiration. Some prokaryotes undergo aerobic respiration. They do not have mitochondria, so they use the cellular membrane as the location of the transport. Now, with anaerobic respiration, when oxygen is unavailable, cells cannot do glycolysis with the aerobic respiration, so the Krebs cycle and electron transport. If there's not a lot of oxygen, they got to do something else, or they're going to be out of luck. They need that energy. The anaerobic process that follows glycolysis is anaerobic respiration or fermentation. And fermentation occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell and produces NAD+ and ATP. Now there's lactic acid fermentation. Enzymes convert pyruvate made during glycolysis into lactic acid. Skeletal muscles produce lactic acid when the body cannot supply enough oxygen, such as during periods of strenuous exercise. Think about a time when you ran a lot of laps or you did a lot of walking, you lifted some weights. If you don't breathe well or drink plenty of water and keep yourself hydrated, your muscles kind of burn. Well, what's happening is without enough oxygen, because you're not breathing well and hydrating, your body is trying to create this energy from somewhere. So it does fermentation and creates lactic acid instead of breaking down the oxygen. And when that happens, that acid literally burns. It burns inside your muscles. So when you're feeling the burn, you don't have enough oxygen or water. So if you keep yourself hydrated, breathe well, you're not going to feel that burn as much when you exercise. There's also alcohol fermentation. This is different. This occurs in yeast and bacteria, converts pyruvate into ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. Certain drinks are made this way. Certain breads are made this way. So that's not exactly what's happening in your body, but it is another form of anaerobic respiration. So that's why it's thrown in here. And then finally, photosynthesis and cellular respiration have this kind of symbiotic relationship with one another. With photosynthesis, you're giving off oxygen and absorbing carbon dioxide. With respiration, you're giving off carbon dioxide and absorbing oxygen. Again, these processes feed off of each other. Animals need plants. Plants need animals. It's very cool how that works out like that. Just remember, in each of these processes, photosynthesis uses the sun to create ATP for its cells. Respiration uses oxygen and makes ATP for itself. It's definitely deeper than that for both of these cases, but what you need to remember is where the energy source begins and the fact that they both make a lot of ATP. Where does the energy begin? What is it making? ATP, okay? Keep those things in mind and know those facts about cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Okay, hopefully those facts help you a little bit better. Break it down a little bit for you. Just remember the main thing I said there in the summary at the end. But what I want you to do is go work on your assignments from this week, finish up last week's if you need to. Email me with any questions, do a Google Hangouts, ask me a question. Email me if you want to get a Zoom together for some one-on-one help or a small group of help or whatever. But you guys just let me know exactly what you need, okay? So get to work. Good luck on this week's assignments and let me know if you need anything.